Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Revenue Throughput Podcast. I'm your host, Jose Palomino, and today we'll be interviewing Liston Witherill. And Liston is an expert, a real thought leader in the area of systematizing, improving sales process. He does this in a way that's creative, but that's very realistic. And if you listen carefully, you're going to get some pointers that you can apply immediately to your business to good effect. So without further ado, let's welcome Liston to our show. And welcome, Liston, to the Revenue Throughput Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me here. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, so Liston, you do so many different things, or rather you have depth in what you do. I think it'd be helpful for our listeners to just maybe frame it in terms of who you primarily focus on and what do you do primarily for them.
Yeah, so right now, so I think when I booked this originally, I was kind of an independent maverick, as they say, right? I was out doing sales consulting and sales training for companies, mostly professional services companies, often agencies. Now I'm head of growth at a very fast growing agency. So I run all of our sales and marketing, but I'm also a podcaster and writer, and I focus on sales and trust and systems thinking in particular. How does the whole thing work together to produce outcomes on a regular basis?
Wow, so that's so you're like, you think about these things, and then you actually have to put, and now you're in the hot seat where you have to put these things into practice for your own firm.
Yeah, my payment is contingent on how well I do. Yeah.
There you go. So one thing in just the conversation we had prior to this interview, we talked a little bit about the need for sales process, right? So I want to dig into that a little bit, just the whole idea of what does that mean? Because that gets used a lot. We need a good sales process. Sometimes people refer to it as, we have a methodology. We do Sandler, or we do Miller-Hyman, or we do Richardson. And so let's, for our audience and for us, for this conversation, just how do you land on the thought of what is a sales process? Just high level, what is it? And then we'll get into like what makes a good one and why it matters.
Yeah, so let me quickly nerd out on you and separate a sales methodology, which is the sort of belief system, like what you're trying to do with the customer, in order to either persuade them or just facilitate a great buying experience for them. So for instance, right, there's one called the Challenger Sale, and that's all about challenging your client's ideas and presenting new ones, right? So basically saying, hey, whatever you think is right, I'm going to challenge that. That's the status quo. You should be thinking about this other thing, right? And so that would be a sales methodology. The sales process are the particular steps that you take in your business in order to walk people from initial prospect who has their hand up and says, yes, I'm interested in learning more about this, to actual buyer who's contracted, and now you hand off to your delivery team. Why is sales process such an important thing? Well, I often hear people say that there are naturals at selling. And while it may be true that some people are more charismatic than others, I don't think it's necessarily true that for most of us, sales comes naturally, in the sense of, if you sat down and mapped out exactly what happens throughout the sales process, you're probably not doing it the same way every time, right? So there's a couple reasons why it's really important. One, if you don't do it in a repeatable way, or at least a somewhat repeatable way, you'll never get better at it in sort of a predictable way, right? So if I can break the process into, if I get really granular, let's say like 25 steps, which of those are my weak points? That's what I need to figure out. That's kind of point number one. The second one is, how do you encounter this all the time, I'm sure. Many business owners are the sort of core of the sales function, not because they're so great at sales often, but because they're hungrier and scrappier than everybody else, and they're willing to just throw more effort at it. How are you ever going to get out of your business? Or how are you ever going to grow your business without you being the one actually doing the selling, if you can't describe what it is that you do, or how it works, or why it works sometimes and why it doesn't work other times? So those are all the advantages of having a sales process in place. There are many more, but those are the main ones. And the last thing I'll say is, if you want to increase the value of your business, it's really critical to have a standalone sales process that doesn't involve you at all. And the reason for that is, if you want to sell the business and double your value, it's important to be able to show that the sales process works, and it's not contingent on a cult of personality, right? It's not because Jane Smith is so well known in the industry. It's because you have ideas and systems and actions in place where you can execute a sales process repeatedly without someone else being there, namely you, dear listener.
So I hear you on that, in that 25 step, theoretical, like really granular
Yeah.
process, right?
Right.
So I
right.
could also hear owner operators I'm listening to, CEOs I've worked with, saying, well, wait a second. Every situation is so different. How can you map it out like that? This is not like an e-commerce funnel where you're moving people through step till you get to the point where the final ebook got them flipped, and then they're buying your course. I'm selling $100,000 piece of equipment, or I'm selling an industrial service. Everything is different. So how does sales process work in a world where everything's different?
So, okay. So the example I like to give here is fingerprints, right? So we all have a unique fingerprint. And that's one of the ways that people can identify criminals or do forensic analysis, is by looking at fingerprints and then matching those fingerprints. But if you look into the study of fingerprints, even though there are over 7 billion unique fingerprints on Earth, there's only a few categories of fingerprints, right? We can start to narrow it down and say, there are these 5 types. And then within those 5 types, maybe there's 3 subtypes. And that helps us narrow down our search, right? So there, as much as we like to think of ourselves as being in situations that are totally unique with no precedent, I would challenge anybody listening to this on that point. And the reason is, if you think about sort of how your sales process works, here are the steps that I outline in my book, right? Number one, we have to make sure that there's a fit, right? So I'm going to look at, do they fit my client profile? What's motivating them to buy? What are some of the demographic factors I can observe about them? Like, do they seem like someone who could have a problem that I can help with? Number two, I need to figure out what's actually motivating them. What pain are they in? What goals do they have? And what value would it have to solve those goals? Business value, right?
So
Which could
why are
be
they even taking the meeting, for that matter?
exactly. Yeah. And one of the ways I figured that out is just ask someone in a meeting, why are we here today? Why did you want to talk to me? And they'll tell you, right? The next step is to make an offer. Then we need to go through a process of reaching an agreement, and then we're going to hand off to delivery. That's it. It's always the same. One of the things, like if you're selling a piece of industrial equipment, I'm sure you're always asked is, what other people are using this? What problems did they have? What business results is it creating? What's the ROI, right? Which is my least favorite of all questions in sales and marketing, which could be like 5 podcast episodes. Okay. But they're going to ask those questions. Right. And so in over 90% of the cases, you're going to be able to predict what happens. It's very rare that something brand new that never happened before comes up. Now, it is true that you may need to build in a little bit of flexibility in your process. So I'll give you an example. Sometimes maybe it's an initial meeting and then you go straight to a proposal. Other times maybe it's 2, 3, 4, 5 meetings because they have a hard time making a decision. Maybe there's more at stake for that client or that company. And then they go into proposal, right? So that's okay. There's some flex there. But in terms of how people get to know you, build trust, and actually make a basic decision, it's almost always the same.
Well, it's interesting, Liston, because when I've done coaching and work with people putting their pipelines together, and I dig into each opportunity, especially that big opportunity they're counting on to make their year whole. Oh, and no. It's been delayed 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. Just something always seems to be coming up. And I asked the question of the salesperson, I said, why exactly do they want to do this? What is driving them? What's behind the scenes, right? And when they
Mm-hmm.
say they don't know, I say, well, that's to your point. Well, then we're not really anywhere near closing as they may be thinking it is. We may have even submitted a proposal, but if we don't know what's really driving them, did we aim the proposal at the things that matter most to them? But
Right.
one of the things that in the way you describe that, let me just throw out a little bit of complexity here, right? So often, especially if you sell to larger companies, they have a very formal buying process. They have procurement and all of that. There's also many more stakeholders that get involved. So do you think a process has to take into account, or how does a process take into account the fact that it's not one meeting with one person or even 5 meetings with that one person? In fact, they may not even tell me all the people I need to meet because they're just checking me out at first.
Yeah, well, we're always going to ask, right? And we're always going to ask to be involved in those conversations, but sometimes you can't be because, people buy the way that they want to buy. And I view it as part of my responsibility in the process to teach them how to buy my services well. Sometimes they don't listen. That's okay, right? So that's just part of the process. So one thing that anybody should anticipate is if you're dealing with buying committees. So like in our business, I'm often talking to either the CEO or the CMO of the company in the first or second call. And then they're going to hand it off to someone else and say, okay, this sounds good. Figure out all the details. That person is going to need to go sell the thing that I'm trying to sell them to everybody else on their team. And this is very common. Another version of this is the CEO or whoever's the department head has in mind some project, and they say, go find me 5 vendors. And then someone goes out and builds a spreadsheet with essentially the costs and what they think is a little bit different about the companies and why they should choose one versus another. And they may just decide to cross you off the list at that point. In both of these cases, you need to create tools and give tools for how to sell your thing, because you're not going to be there to sell it, right? So if I'm selling through another person, one question I'll always ask them is, tell me who's going to make this decision, and they'll always share. I've never had a situation where they don't say. And then I say, what do you think they're going to say about this when you hand it to them?
Mm.
And that's a good moment, right? Because if I've built rapport with this person, they'll understand I'm on their side and I'm trying to help them just have a successful project. And sometimes I'll learn something that I may have some influence over, right? So maybe they'll say, well, so and so really cares about the ROI, and you focused on all the emotional benefits of this, right? Can you help me build a business case? Okay, sure. Right? What does that look like? What do they care about? Now we can start to have a conversation about how other people who I'll never meet are going to make the decision. So that's an important part of it. I think another important part is some of the basic tools, like having things written down, documentation. I'm not a big fan of like the company pamphlet, but if you have articles or thought leadership or ways of demonstrating what it is that you do at your company that's different, you have a different point of view from anybody else in the marketplace, that would be something I want to share. And I'm also a big fan of recording and sending videos, which is super easy now, where I'm doing the selling for someone else and I'm talking directly to, say, the CEO and walking them through my proposal, which allows me not to be there and get feedback, but at least gives me control over how it's presented. So I think there's a lot of things you can do here, but in no situation can you ever like totally change the process and get them to do it your way. So you have to adapt and be flexible to the way that your clients buy.
Well, I love that. And I also love that question. And, I'm a big believer that there's immense power in the right question at the right time. And it's always good if you're a sales professional, have a couple of key go-to questions that you can use in different situations. So in that situation, I'm going through somebody else who I hope takes forward my proposal that my whole team has spent, a week, a fortnight putting together. And
Yeah.
maybe the reaction to your question, what do you think they will think about it? Might be, well, they're going to think this is way too complex, or something that has nothing to do with the substance of what I'm proposing, but maybe
Right.
even the manner in which I'm making it. I said, well, what would they like? I said, well, they like a 1-pager. And I said, all right. And I had a binder, or something like that. So just all those things can easily be surfaced by that one question. And it also tells you if you in fact have rapport with that person, if they don't tell you, let me put it another way. If you think you have rapport with that person and they're on your side, and all of a sudden they treat this like a CIA secret, and they become very closed-mouthed about it, maybe you don't have the rapport you thought you had, which is a good thing to know, because then at least you know where you stand. So that's excellent. So all right, so the process steps, you talked about improving process, right? So like, unless you have a process you agree to, we're going to follow these steps, and you just laid out the 5 like meta big pieces of it, right? And then there's sub steps to that. Unless you have it, you can't improve it. So what are some ways that somebody listening to this say, well, I have 3 salespeople. I really don't have, I'm the sales manager, I'm the CEO sales manager, which is very typical in a lot of, B2B owner-led businesses. How do they go about helping them define the process? And then how do we, especially people are in the field, they're doing what they're doing, how do I know that they're following the process?
Well, I think those are very different things. So let me treat them as independent. So the first thing is, how do I define the process? A good exercise is to have a meeting, hour long, maybe even less, get everyone together and say, let's have a brainstorming session. We're going to commit this to paper. How do we sell? Right? So first question is, where do leads come from? A lot of people can't even answer that. Right? So where do our typical leads come from? Then what do we do next? We get an email, we get a phone call, someone meets someone at something and they say they're interested in our thing. What do we do next? Usually it's like, we set up a meeting. Okay, we set up a meeting. What happens in the meeting? And what you're going to find really quickly is, with 4 people in the room, 1 manager and 3 salespeople, is everybody has a slightly different idea about what should happen and when, right? And so the first thing is just to gather all together, like, what is actually happening right now? And then it'll be easier to kind of lay out the sort of ideal way of doing it. And I do believe you can do this in an hour, right? So use my steps here, as I mentioned, are in my book. So number 1, how do we determine if there's a fit? Number 2, how do we understand what's going on with this person, their motivation, right? The buyer's motivation. And that's going to be through conversation, usually 1 or more. Number 3, how do we make an offer? Number 4, how do we reach an agreement? And number 5, how do we transition them from buyer to now client? Those are, if you can just figure out what are the things under those banners that you're doing now, it'll become pretty obvious what your weak points are. Right? So a sort of next step would be just to ask, okay, we understand what these major points are of the sales process, or the beats of the sales process. Where are we getting stuck repeatedly? And then you can start to ask, okay, why? Why are we getting stuck there? What can we do differently? So that's number 1. Number 2, how do you know all of your sales reps are following the process? Well, you really do have to ask. And also I would say at the top, if you don't have a process written down and communicated and trained, I promise you they are not following it, because they don't know what it is, and it's your fault, right? So don't worry about it. It's okay. You've been successful to this point, but it is time to first take that first step of like committing it to paper, figuring out exactly what is everybody doing now, then make some subtle changes about what they should be doing. And you mentioned pipeline. I'm a big fan of having a CRM. So that'll elevate the value of your business by itself. If you can just document who's a lead, how often do leads come in, how likely am I to close, like all that data is good for a buyer of your business eventually. But the lanes in your CRM should also signal to the salespeople what they should be doing next, right? So that's a big help also in terms of a sort of passive management tool. Once it's set up, people are more likely to follow the process. And, of course, if it's not measured, it can't be improved. That old maxim from Drucker, that's an important part of this. So I would say you got to have one-on-one meetings with your salespeople at least monthly to understand what's working for them and what's not, and also get them to lay out what are their best opportunities. Even if you have a CRM, I can see what's in there, but I want you to tell me what you think your best opportunities are and why. And unfortunately, sales historically has favored just hiring people who are people pleasers and very gregarious and like high in excitement, but that can create false optimism, right? So we may have to temper that in some situations and make sure that people are excited about the right things. So that's what I would say is number one, lay out the process. Number two, have a CRM in place. Number three, have regular meetings with each individual, not in a group setting where you're embarrassing people publicly. That is, would you want that? Anyway, that's a pet peeve of mine. We want to have one-on-one meetings that are focused on learning and improvement, not shaming.
Not shaming. I love that. And I love the idea of having kind of the stages of what you think is supposed to happen in reflected in your CRM. So it becomes pretty clear. And I think the power of asking somebody kind of open-ended, like, which deals are you most excited about, and tell me why. And you dig into it and you realize it could be, I have a relationship there, or I really see their need is very well aligned with what we're doing, more so than my other opportunities. So we should be able to close that business. So those are all very powerful, I think, insights for us, Liston. And you mentioned your book. So I'd like for our listeners to hear just the name of the book and where they can get it.
Okay, the book is called How to Sell Creativity. It's in progress. By the time this is published, it will be available for pre-sale. So you can just go to Amazon. It's called How to Sell Creativity. Or you can just go to my website, Liston, liston.io.
Well, Liston, this has been a fantastic conversation. I mean, real pithy, to the point, super helpful for, I'm sure, many people listening. So thank you again for being part of the Revenue Throughput podcast.
Thank you.